Next on Arizona 360, understanding how families are being separated at the border.
You had, 6, 7 parents, crying before the judge asking where their kids are.
Patrolling the border by air, a new view at the challenges posed by the desert terrain.
We'll put a rescue ahead of everything else.
Plus, how new tariffs could stymie Arizona's growth.
It's a backdoor tax increase on the American people.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you so much for joining us. This week, officials from the city of Tucson, Pima County, and local tribes called for an end to the zero-tolerance policy on illegal immigration that has led to the separation of children from their parents. More than 100 other local, state, and national organizations have demanded the same from the Trump administration. Meanwhile, families continue to seek asylum legally at the ports of entry in the Southwest. Last week, we saw firsthand several families waiting to declare asylum at the port of entry in Nogales, Sonora. A Mexican woman we spoke to said she and her toddler had arrived 9 days earlier.
There are people who look at this situation badly. We don't like coming here. We don't want it to be this way. We want a better life for our kids. We don't want anything else. We're coming for work, to provide a better quality of life for our children.
Rafael Carranza covers the U.S.-Mexico border for the Arizona Republic and clarified how this policy is being enforced, beginning with how it applies to immigrants seeking asylum.
I think there's a very important distinction here. It's how the parents are reaching the United States. If they are crossing the border illegally, so they're going in between the ports of entry and turning themselves into Border Patrol, the likelihood of that under the new zero-tolerance policy is that they will be referred for criminal prosecution, and because they're going into criminal proceedings, their children will be removed from their care and placed into the government's custody. However, if they opt to go through the ports of entry, Customs and Border Protection has talked about how they have a legal right to do so and present themselves. The challenges there, of course, being that they could wait for days and days for that opportunity. However, once they make it past that, the likelihood that they will be separated decreases because they're not going into criminal proceedings, but then it depends on available space. If they are, being held in detention and there's only beds available at an adult-only facility, then obviously their children are not going to be taken with them.
Health and Human Services has said that these children are not lost. And as a matter of fact, the agency claims to have made phone calls to some of these so-called sponsors who are in the U.S. Is it fair to say the children are dropping off the radar, or where are they going if that sponsor in the U.S. can't be located?
This whole, debate over whether they were lost or not kind of stems from, the Health and Human Services trying to contact or, follow up with a lot of the children that they had processed. They're not necessarily lost in the sense that they can't be found by anyone, but in the sense that the government just doesn't know where they are. They were placed, if they were released, that means that they were placed into the care of a relative or a family friend. In many cases, the families just don't want to be found because they're here illegally. So that seems to be kind of the idea behind the government going on. And there's also other instances where maybe they might have moved or something else might have happened where they're in a different location now. But the kids are, for the most part, with their families or relatives that they were released into. Just the government doesn't have a way to track them.
You've crossed in Tucson and Yuma sector to meet with some of these asylum seekers. It seems there's a communication occurring south of the border that now is the time. Why are we suddenly seeing this influx over the last 6 weeks or so?
There seemed to be an arbitrary deadline of May 31st, as if you make it there before May 31st and you have a child, you'll automatically be able to get into the country and get asylum. And so because of that, through word of mouth, that's why we started seeing a large increase in the number of people, it seems. I think a lot of the policies that the Trump administration has put in place has kind of instilled a lot of fear as well in a lot of migrants, saying that if I don't do it now, I may not have the chance to do it later on.
Your perspective is unique because you're traveling south of the border, meeting with asylum seekers, and then you're sitting in on federal court hearings where you're hearing firsthand from immigrants asking the judge, where is my child? This is very real.
Yeah, and this really came into focus here in Arizona, I think approximately about a month ago. That's when we really started hearing a lot more about this. There was a day, I've been talking to some of the activists who are very critical about Operation Streamline, which is, some of those court hearings that prosecute some of those migrants. They were telling me that, they were sitting in as they regularly do, just to check to make sure that there's no outstanding issues. And then all of a sudden they show up one week and you had, 6, 7 parents crying before the judge asking where their kids are. And so that really caught them off guard. So they started tracking a lot more of those instances. The advocates as well as the court-appointed attorneys for the migrants were caught off guard by that too. They tell us that they were feeling very frustrated because the system that was put in place, it seems the government had a system to separate the families, but not to reunite them afterwards.
Across the nation, we're seeing leaders in cities and counties coming out and saying this has got to stop. Somewhat premature, given that we don't have all the facts at this point?
Yeah, and there's still a lot of details that seem to be, coming out every day, some different type of process. And now I think we're starting to see a greater response from the federal government, at least some sort of better attempts at coordination between the three main agencies that handle this issue with family separations. Because when we're talking about it, it's not just, the Department of Homeland Security, which detains and deports immigrants, but you also have the Department of Justice who's prosecuting them, and you also have Health and Human Services, as we mentioned, who are taking care of the kids. But for a lot of advocates, they say it's not enough. They definitely want to see a halt to this process, which is why we've seen a lot more municipalities and community groups speak out and ask for the government to stop this practice, and even asking outside groups to intervene, such as the United Nations or the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights.
Okay, Rafael Carranza from the Arizona Republic, thank you.
Thank you.
Last week, we heard from the Chief Patrol Agent of the Border Patrol Tucson sector about some of the challenges and dangers agents face on the job. A week later, an agent was shot several times while near Arivaca. He's now recovering. At a news conference, Chief Rodolfo Karish said it happened in a mountainous rural area with limited infrastructure, something echoed by a Border Patrol union official.
You're working in a very remote area. You're working in the dark. It can happen to anyone. I mean, it's unfortunate, but this, I think, shows the continuous dangers that these agents are exposed to.
Going back to our previous conversation with Chief Karish, we asked to see some of his areas of concern, and the agency agreed to an aerial tour on a Blackhawk helicopter. Customs and Border Protection has a few of these helicopters stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Our tour with the chief and a team of specialized agents covered areas over Arivaca, Sasaba, Sells, and 3 Points.
All right, we're pushing northbound in the 3 Points area. We're going to come up on Highway 86. We're going to go right around the north side of the Bobby Mountain Range.
On board a Blackhawk helicopter, you get a real sense of how vast the desert, the border region really are.
Absolutely. It's a very critical part of our operation is having these aircraft available and ready to go.
On this day, we're in the West Desert.
And your speed is good if you guys want to start slinging them back.
The doors open and below trails are visible. Our pilots say they're remnants of wildlife and smugglers. We fly over the law enforcement center on the Tohono Nation. It's used by federal and tribal partners. It also functions as a forward operating base, putting agents and resources closer to the border in remote areas. Then mobile surveillance, towers on a truck perched on a remote hill. Chief Karish explains its role.
I mean, you can imagine having a radar out on the water that detects boats coming in. That's a maritime radar. This is ground-based radar, which in essence does the same thing. So now you can actually detect some of that traffic that's coming up to the border. It helps the pilots go to a spot where there's actually people moving through an area.
Minutes later, we're near the Sasaba port of entry, where agents are on foot tracking a group of people who ran back south. It's a challenge from the air and on the ground. Farther west, the desert becomes more desolate. Minutes later, a call comes in.
The National Guard, here they are, once again helping us out on a rescue mission.
Does he have a cell phone? No. I'll ask him.
Someone called 911 from this area less than an hour ago. The crew opens the doors for a better look, but can't find anyone.
We obviously deploy our assets to it, and we found that there was this exact location based off of the repeaters that he's hitting, the cell towers in this area. Kind of guess what would we do if I was on the ground calling 911? Well, obviously, you would go to where you think there's a building. There's a water tower at 12 o'clock right there. So we, the fact that the person doesn't do that makes you kind of wonder, are they really needing help, or do they know our strategy whereby we'll put a rescue ahead of everything else, which is how it should be, but sometimes that's taken advantage of. This actually isn't as frustrating as when they call 911 from the top of the Bobby Mountain Range. That's where it gets very dangerous for us, because the aircraft is right up against its limitations of performance, and we are really putting our lives at risk to pull people off of the top of those Bobos.
The pilot says the GPS coordinates for this call are very accurate.
3 weeks ago, I had a call just north of here, a female, and she lost the signal. We lost the signal as me she had passed. I mean, we landed, I got out, I started doing CPR. More stars showed up, and then it was just too late. There was just nothing we could do.
Situations like that aren't every day, but often, especially in the summer. Last week, agents rescued a man who called for help.
I think they don't recognize just how difficult and challenging this terrain can be. Oftentimes people lie to them that a town is just over the next ridge.
Our pilots leave the area. A National Guard helicopter and ground agents will continue the search. We head back along Highway 86 and fly over a temporary checkpoint.
People are always going to be bringing contraband in various methods, but part of that is still to load it into vehicles that come up highways, and then also you have undocumented migrants that are being smuggled along these highways, which is the primary purpose for our checkpoints, is illegal immigration.
There has been debate about the effectiveness of these checkpoints and whether they should move from location to location.
Checkpoints because they are of value to us.
On the flight back to Davis-Monthan, Chief Karish explains why the agency agreed to give Arizona Public Media a behind-the-scenes look at their work.
Well, it would virtually be impossible to have an agent in every location here on 262. That's why we utilize technology. That's why we have aircraft. That's why we have sensors to help us do our job, is to alert us that there's a potential of traffic coming through an area. Bottom line, it's saving lives. I mean, we're here to protect the country, but also is to preserve life. That's utmost importance to us.
Our ride with Border Patrol covered large portions of the Tohono Nation, whose land spans both Arizona and Mexico. It puts some of the problems around border enforcement on the tribe's doorstep, so to speak, and leaders there refer to it as a tri-national issue. We went on another ride, this time with tribal leaders, to get a better understanding of life on the nation and their relationship with federal law enforcement. The Tohono Nation is comprised of 14,000 tribal members. 9,000 of them live in Arizona, primarily in the community of Sells and in nearby villages. The nation covers about 2.8 million acres. Much of that is directly along the U.S.-Mexico border. A symbol of the nation is Babakiveri Peak. It's more than a landmark to the nation.
The significance to Babakiveri is one of the places our creator, Itoi, calls home. It is very important for the autumn, the people, to preserve and protect our sacred sites.
Here, talk of border security is a delicate subject.
Although it's a border here between two countries, to us it's an invisible line.
This is the San Miguel Gate, where tribal members can cross freely, so to speak. Most days you'll see military in Mexico and Border Patrol agents in the U.S. When there's no one, it's an honor system.
As tribal members, in order to cross at a traditional crossing point such as the San Miguel Gate here, a tribal member would have to present their tribal ID to the United States Border Patrol agent. They ask them a number of questions, and what they do generally is run a check on them to find out if they have any wants or warrants, or are they wanted for a crime, or have they created have violated any immigration issues in the past. And they have the opportunity to deny a person, right, to come in. But this is just to inform them that they are a tribal member, that they may go to the reservation to seek social services.
That cultural freedom is what Verlin Jose wants to maintain. Over the years, the aesthetics of this border have changed. A more fortified fence has slowed drug and human smuggling while allowing for this environment to remain mostly intact.
People often ask, what is your relationship with the Border Patrol or the Department of Homeland Security? I believe we have an okay relationship. I won't call it great. I believe that there has been some opportunity for the nation to be at the table. I also believe that if we continue to talk to each other, that we can we can be allies and not divided as enemies, because the first things that happen is that the federal government and their Army of Border Patrols come in and say, okay, well, we're federal agents, we have authority over here, and looked at every tribal member as a criminal, as suspect, and we're not. We have a vested interest here to protect the land as well too. So we had to work on communications, just like we're working on the communications with the Mexican government. We have to have a seat at the table.
That relationship has improved over recent years, says Richard Saunders, who oversees public safety on the nation.
It just so happens that the Tohono Nation was, kind of a bottleneck, path of least resistance, if you will.
Turns out the feds and tribal members were fighting the same fight against drug smugglers and human traffickers. So over the years, they forged a relationship through communication and respect.
I am totally confident as a result of law enforcement partnerships, efforts, intelligence gathering, vehicle barriers that we're standing in front of, all the resources of manpower, technology, has all played a role in reducing activity, not only through the Tohono Nation, but to the rest of the United States there.
Border Patrol agents have limited authority here, and the same goes for tribal enforcement.
Because of manpower and staffing issues that the Tohono Police currently has, there's been a number of times, particularly in some of the remote villages and particularly down south in some of the remote southern villages there, there'd be a call for service there, and we'd put it out, and Customs and Border Protection, our federal partners, they'd respond and they'd be the first on scene. It's a must. It's a must that we work hand in hand, we work jointly, put all politics aside there. We'll leave that to the higher level there, but it's a must that we collaborate, we partnership, we share intelligence, we respond to calls to back each other up there. That is vitally important in our effort to secure, protect not only the good citizens of the Tohono Nation, but the good citizens of Arizona and the United States there for that matter.
In this rural community, poverty and crime are part of life here, feeding into social and behavioral issues.
It saddens me to know that tribal members, community members, family members also participate in this when we're trying to stop the war on drugs, stop the war on illegal activity. However, it's unfortunate that there are many challenges on the nation. The poverty rate is high. There are no jobs. There are no homes. There's no infrastructure. There's no businesses. So as a tribal leader, we work to try to bring some of those things. Unfortunately, it's easy for someone to walk up to a high school student and say, hey, I'll give you $1,000 if you drive this car from here to there. Or I'll give you $5,000 if you carry this backpack from here to there. And what's a young person to think?
Jose says the nation is working to create economic and educational opportunities, but it's a tough balance.
The Tohono Nation has created laws, policy to govern the land, not just because they want, it's an intent to keep non-members off the nation. The laws were created to protect the members of this nation.
Maintaining a cultural identity while securing a nation remains a work in progress.
Arizona's economy is growing. Economists at the University of Arizona College of Management forecasting added jobs, a population boost, and an increased income in 2018. We get a better sense of how one company views Arizona's economic potential. First, Garrick Taylor with the Arizona Chamber of Commerce offered this take on the state's economic prospects.
We're very encouraged by where we sit right now. When Fortune magazine says that you're one of the top 10 states for projected job growth, that's great. When CEO magazine says you've got a top 10 business environment, great place to invest and expand a business, that's great. Because the cost of doing business in California is so expensive, but you can reach those same customers by setting up your distribution centers here in Arizona. When you see the logistics side of our economy humming, that means trucks and trains and aeroplanes coming through this state. That means there's stuff on those conveyances going to market.
Union Pacific has a big role in moving goods across Arizona. Public Affairs Director Dan Harbeck says the company has nearly 700 miles of track across the state and spent more than $200 million over the last 5 years fortifying its infrastructure here, with more to come.
Just this past April, we announced a $26.5 million project just for our capital spend in 2018. So what that means is, for example, we placed about 8 miles of new rail in the Yuma area, and we replaced about 40,000 ties Wilcox going east, along with about 19,000 tons of ballast. And so that all goes to allowing us to replace certain infrastructure that we have, make sure that it's in place to serve our customers, and continue to respond to those demands.
Strategy for business, but also for safety.
Safety is the core of everything we do here at Union Pacific. You're right, not only do we spend those capital dollars to harden our infrastructure and serve our customers, but the way we do it, the technology we have in place to support that has driven down, customer incidents, employee incidents.
I'd like to follow up on a piece we did with Union Pacific about a year ago and the hundreds of locomotives parked along Interstate 10 between Tucson and Benson. They're gone now. Where'd they go?
I think there are folks who point to the economy and just what we've seen there in terms of upticks in certain markets, but for UP and probably for us more broadly, it's more a story of our flexibility. I think we're constantly evaluating what our customer product is and our ability to adapt to our customers' needs. And so having the ability to have resources like that stored in different places allows us to pull them and store them and allows us to be more nimble in terms of serving our customers. That's probably the larger story beyond what we're just seeing in the economy.
Trains are moving, that means good things for the economy. Where does Arizona fit into that map of what's really driving Union Pacific's traffic right now?
Anyone who opens up a newspaper today or a trade magazine, you look at those rankings of the fastest growing communities, counties, cities, states. Arizona has been and continues to be one of those fastest growing states. And there's many in the Southwest. We've seen some of that in the Southeast over time. But you're seeing some of these states really turn the lights on when it comes to that growth.
Anything unique about Arizona that you would attribute that to?
A couple of things. One, just our footprint here. So what we call the Sunset Route, which is really Los Angeles to El Paso, major trade thoroughfare east to west. And the fact that that runs right along I-10 through Arizona, I think you see Phoenix as a consumer market. So in other words, delivering more product to Phoenix, which just speaks to its growth, building materials, lumber, steel. But then the fact that Union Pacific Railroad is the only freight railroad with 6 gateways in and out of Mexico. One of those being here in Arizona, at Nogales.
Fair to say there is connectivity between Arizona and Mexico, and it's important for that relationship to continue.
It is. You can't help but think about NAFTA and that discussion today. It's something we're paying particular attention to, not just Union Pacific, but I think business at large is paying attention to that. And if you look at it, Arizona and Mexico, I think Mexico is Arizona's #1 trading partner. And so the fact that from a freight rail perspective, we help serve some of those needs is a big responsibility for us and something that we prize in terms of having a hand in that cross-border trade with Mexico.
Back at the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, Garrick Taylor also spoke about maintaining a strong cross-border trade relationship with Mexico. And our discussion turned to the impact of tariffs, including those imposed by the U.S. on Mexican steel and aluminum. Taylor explained how retaliatory tariffs from affected countries could affect shoppers and manufacturers in Arizona.
This is what they call the tit-for-tat moment in international trade. You're going to make my products less competitive in your country. Well, we can play that game. What do you like to sell in my country? That's going to become more expensive here. This is what trade partners do, and it is bad news for the manufacturers in this country who sell abroad. But again, what happens to consumers here who want to buy a steel product, whether it's a washing machine or an automobile, the prices go up, the selection goes down, and it's a backdoor tax increase on the American people.
Is there a benefit to doing it this way?
Look, if you occupy a certain segment of the political spectrum that represents, for example, organized labor, you've been agitating for this sort of thing for a while. You've seen, for example, when he announced the steel tariffs, he was doing an Oval Office meeting with steel workers. I think it's chasing fool's gold, though. It makes the other inputs that go into the manufacturing process go up. It costs other jobs in the economy. It's ultimately a lose-lose. The president has said that trade wars are easy to win. They're not.
New tariffs come as the U.S. is in the middle of renegotiating NAFTA with Mexico and Canada. Talks have been off and on for the last several months. Recently, President Trump suggested negotiating new agreements with each country individually. What does the market look like if the United States deals directly with Mexico, Mexico deals directly with Canada? How does that look?
One of the things you've heard from this administration, whether it's the United States Trade Representative or the President himself, is that he prefers bilateral trade deals. He'll cut a deal with Mexico, he'll cut a deal with Canada. That ship sailed nearly 25 years ago with the advent of NAFTA. We now have supply chains that are totally integrated across international borders. To attempt to unwind that would be economic lunacy. It would only cost jobs, and in fact what you risk is sending entire supply chains overseas. It's a nearly 25-year-old agreement. Should it be updated? Yes. We negotiated that agreement in a dial-up world. Let's bring it into a broadband economy. Let's recognize things like e-commerce. These are things that should be fixed.
What can happen locally in Arizona that could positively impact the relationship between Arizona and Mexico?
Well, let's start with the agreement first, the trade agreement first. We're very fortunate that we have a member of our congressional delegation who sits on the House Ways and Means Committee. Kudos to Representative David Schweikert, who's really been a positive pro-business, pro-trade voice within that committee. But at a local level, kudos to state legislators who put together a major delegation that went to Mexico City and Guanajuato last fall. It sends a great message that this state recognizes and values our relationship not only with Sonora but with all of Mexico, that we value this relationship not only from an economic standpoint but from a cultural standpoint, from a social standpoint. It's important to us. And then finally, I can't think of two governors who have a better binational cross-border relationship than Doug Ducey and Governor Claudia Pavlovich.
This week, both governors will meet in Tucson for the Arizona-Mexico Commission Summit, along with policymakers and business leaders from both sides of the border.
This summit, twice a year, where these state leaders come together, has really taken on greater importance in the last few years, especially under the Ducey administration. He really values his relationship with his counterpart in Mexico. We're going great guns in Arizona. If we could get the White House to take a page out of the Arizona playbook, we'd be in a lot better position.
And that's all for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. To find out what we're working on throughout the week, visit us on social media and let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.